For decades, the story of China has dazzled the world. From poverty to prosperity, from bicycles to bullet trains, from rice paddies to robotic factories, it has been called the greatest economic miracle of our lifetime. But behind the glimmering skyline and high-speed rail lines, a shadow is growing, a debt mountain rising out of control, a housing market collapsing on itself, a generation quietly stepping back from the hustle, and a government more powerful than ever, but standing on uncertain ground. This is not the story you've heard. It's the truth behind the headlines. It's about how the world's second largest economy stumbled, and why its fall isn't coming the way doomsayers predict. Let's dive into the 13 pillars shaking the Chinese dragon, and the ripple effect it could send through the global economy. In 1980, if you'd visited Shenzhen, you'd have seen little more than dirt roads and fishing boats. Today, it looks like the set of a science fiction movie. Shenzhen is home to over 17 million people, a global tech hub, and one of the richest cities in China. How did that happen in just 40 years? It began with Deng Xiaoping's radical gamble, an experiment with capitalism inside communism. Shenzhen became China's first special economic zone, a free market island in a sea of central planning. And it worked too well. Other cities followed. Skyscrapers rose like weeds. China built entire megacities faster than the West could approve a building permit. The message was clear. In China, growth wasn't just a goal, it was a mandate. But that obsession with endless growth came with dangerous assumptions, like believing there would always be someone to fill every building, buy every condo, and take every job. That assumption is now unraveling. If the US or Europe grew their economies at 5%, economists would throw a parade. But in China, 5% feels like a funeral. Why? Because China's economic model and its debt were built on double-digit growth. For decades, 10% was the norm. Whole budgets, infrastructure plans, and local government debt repayments were made assuming this would never slow. But it has. A simple example. A $1 trillion economy growing at 10% becomes $2.71 trillion in 10 years. At 5%, only $1.65 trillion. That's a $1 trillion gap, enough to bankrupt cities, enough to stall entire industries, enough to turn ambition into panic. And that's exactly what's happening. They call them ghost cities, towering skyscrapers, pristine roads, playgrounds without children, thousands of apartments bought but never lived in. Why build so much with no one to live there? Because in China, real estate was more than housing. It was wealth, a way to store value, a national obsession. Local governments made their money selling land. Developers borrowed to build. Families borrowed to buy. But the buyers weren't moving in, they were speculating. And then, the math stopped working. Population growth slowed. Migration dropped. And worse, the population actually began to shrink. The result? Entire cities empty, cranes frozen in place, and families holding mortgages on homes they'll never live in. This wasn't just bad planning, it was systemic overconfidence, and it built a mountain of debt. China's official debt is around 77% of GDP, lower than the US. But that number is a mirage, because local governments, state-owned companies, shadow banks, and households all borrowed too. Add it all up, the true debt may exceed 360% of GDP. That's over $52 trillion. And here's the scary part. Much of this debt is off the books, hidden in shell companies, masked in shady accounting, or deliberately massaged to keep appearances intact. Even the Chinese government admits the numbers aren't real. Former Premier Li Keqiang once said, "GDP figures are man-made." Let that sink in. We fear inflation. But deflation, that's a slow, quiet killer. In a deflationary economy, prices fall. Sounds good? Think again. When consumers expect prices to drop, they stop spending. Businesses cut wages. Layoffs rise, growth stalls, and debt becomes heavier. Why? Because you still owe the same money, but now earn less. This is happening in China. Real estate prices are falling. Factories are closing. Youth unemployment is high. And instead of spending, people are hoarding. In a consumer-driven world, that's an economic death spiral. Is China's economy shrinking? It's hard to say, because the data might be fake. Local officials are under pressure to report good news, so they tweak numbers, delay bad news, or bury it entirely. The result? A nation navigating a storm with a broken compass. And investors? They're flying blind. Even international institutions like the World Bank rate China low on statistical transparency. That's a nice way of saying, we don't believe your numbers. When China's own premier stopped trusting the official GDP, he made his own index. Electricity consumption, rail cargo, bank lending. 3 numbers, no spin. If factories are running, lights are on. If products are moving, cargo's up. If businesses are borrowing, growth is coming. This became known as the Li Keqiang Index, and it often tells a darker story than the government does. Right now, those indicators are flatlining. You can fake stats. You can't fake lights from space. Economists now use satellite imagery to track nighttime brightness. More lights, more activity. Studies found that light emissions in China don't match the reported growth. One study estimated China overstated GDP by 30 to 40% for years. You don't need a calculator to know that's bad. Why do Chinese families invest everything in real estate? Because there's no better option. The stock market is volatile, savings accounts pay little, and investing overseas is restricted. So people turn to homes, even if they're empty, even if they're falling apart. Add social pressure, like the need to own a home to marry, and it's clear. Property isn't just financial, it's cultural. But now the market is cracking. Prices are falling, developers are defaulting, and people are losing faith. That's not just an economic issue. That's a crisis of confidence. China's old tricks are losing power. Manufacturing is moving to Vietnam, India, and Mexico. Youth are refusing to work long hours for low pay, a movement called lying flat. And infrastructure projects? Many are unfinished. Even the once-hailed Belt and Road Initiative is struggling, with partners defaulting on loans and questioning China's motives. So is China doomed? Not quite. Yes, it faces enormous challenges. But China also has $3.4 trillion in foreign reserves. It has total control over banks, media, and capital flows. And it can enforce policies instantly. That's a big reason why collapse in the Western sense is unlikely. More likely, a long, painful stagnation, a retreat from globalization, a tightening grip on its people. Japan in the 1990s faced similar problems: a bursting housing bubble, aging population, and decades of flat growth. China's path may be similar, but with a twist. China is still poorer, less transparent, more centralized, and far more integrated into global supply chains. If China slows down, the world slows down. Think China's economy doesn't affect you? Think again. If China weakens, exports drop, global inflation rises, supply chains break. Your next smartphone? More expensive. Your job? Possibly at risk. Your portfolio? Already exposed. This isn't just a Chinese story, it's a global one. The dragon isn't dead, but it is wounded, and how it heals, or hides the damage, will define the 21st century. We're witnessing history, not the end, but the transformation of an empire. So don't blink, don't trust the headlines, watch the signals. Because when China shifts, the world shakes, and the next chapter has just begun.